Years ago, I was on a cross-country trip solo to a family reunion. I was supposed to make it to a friend's house, but there was horrible weather, and it was slow moving. Then a terrible accident happened just ahead of me, and I was stuck for quite a while. All told, I was 5 hours behind schedule. I was exhausted, in need of a bathroom and a shower, so I pulled into a little strip motel off of a fairly backroad state road. It was obviously small and dirty, but I figured it would work in a pinch. There was a window to the outside where check-in was. The guy there eyed me up. At that time I was a college-aged girl, and asked me if I was traveling alone. I went to hand him my ID and credit card, but he insisted on cash only. Red flags were going off at this point, but I scrounged together just enough cash and he tossed me the key. The room was dirty, barely bigger than the bed. The first thing I did was go to the bathroom. Then I flipped up the mattress. Dirty, signs of bed bugs. And a moment later, I spied a cockroach. That was it. I was out. I decided I would use the parking space at least and sleep in the back trunk hatch of my SUV. I curled up, using a suitcase for a pillow and random clothes for a blanket, and fell asleep for an hour. I woke up aware of someone talking on a phone outside, and glanced out to see the guy from checkout standing outside. It was now around 3 a.m. He finished up his call, then walked quietly over to my room, unlocked the door, and walked in. The lights didn't turn on, and a minute or two later he came back out, slamming the door behind him and cursing, with another guy. I hadn't seen two guys enter, so I still don't know where he came from. They angrily talked for a moment, then check-in guy walked over to my SUV. I quickly covered up my head with a shirt. After he tried the locked door, he peered into the back seat, but between my tinted windows and blending into the general mess, he didn't notice me in the hatch. The two guys walked away to the far side of the lot, talking more, and the one gesturing across the street where a diner was. While they were distracted, I climbed up to the front seat and started the SUV, them turning around in surprise as I pulled away. I called my friends back home and told them, but I didn't want to worry my family, so I said nothing to them. When I got back home some 3 weeks later, we figured out the name of the hotel thanks to Google Maps and called the local police. They told me the place had closed down only days before I called. This was about a decade ago. It took place along 250, I believe, in Virginia. The place's name was Mountaintop or Mountainside Motel or something. It was a single-story building, check-in window in the middle, tiny diner across the street, but no other businesses nearby. My logic was that it was smarter than parking by the side of the road. Police took my info, but never called me back. Never found out anything from web searches immediately afterwards. When I was in my early 20s, I stayed the night at two of my friends' house. They broke out the Ouija board around midnight. Almost immediately, the board started spelling out that I needed to leave immediately, and how it hated me. I didn't believe in the supernatural aspect of it, but I didn't think it was my friends being that vicious to me either. It just kept up with really horrible messages for about 30 minutes. The final message was that if I had taken its advice and left earlier, I would have died in a car accident. Completely unnerved, I slept between my friends all night in one bed. When I got home the next day, my mom described really bizarre behavior from my cat from midnight until 1 a.m. My Siamese kept running down our upstairs hallway and flinging herself full force against my closed bedroom door. She also had this really loud, desperate meow. My parents were actually worried she was going to hurt herself, she was so violent. I truly believe she was trying to get to me to keep me from harm. She never did anything like that ever again. When I was 7 years old, I was living in an older house in the suburbs. Me and my bro shared a room upstairs. We were sleeping when all of a sudden I was awoken by the sound of a baby crying. My brother woke up too and asked if I could hear that. We decided to investigate and found that the sound was coming from inside the drywall. There was no baby living there with us. We both freaked out and climbed into bed with our parents. It continued to happen every night after that, until one day we got so fed up we broke a hole in the drywall to save the baby. And from that point forward, it just stopped. Another one from the same house. I was downstairs and heard someone saying, "Hello, hello." I thought it was my grandpa who would randomly stop by. I followed the sound, thinking it was coming from the back door. I got out and noticed it was actually coming from the basement. I followed it slowly and it led me to a door in the basement. This door had had like 6 padlocks on it since we moved in. I put my hand on the door and it stopped. I noped all the way back upstairs to my mom's legs. My mom later told us that a baby and an elderly man had passed away in that house. She said she would hear the old man too, but didn't believe us about the baby because we would get her every night, and when she got upstairs, it wouldn't be heard crying anymore. Still gives me and my bro the shivers when we think about it. My dad, my brother, and I went to a movie theater one day in Florida. It was about 4-ish, so it was getting darker, but still light out. We went up to the front where you buy tickets, and when we looked around, there was absolutely no one in the movie theater at all. No employees, no other guests. We simply walked in, looking all around to try to find anyone we could purchase a movie ticket, but could find no one else. All the movies in each of the theaters we checked were running, but with no one else inside. So we just sat down and watched a movie, then left without seeing anyone else the whole time. It was very surreal. Another user responds, "My ex-partner and I went to a small local cinema to see one of the early Paranormal Activity movies. Late night session. We paid at the concession stand and went in. We were the only 2 people in the theater for the movie. Once the film ended and we were sufficiently spooked, we noticed that the lights didn't come back on in the room. We explored the rest of the building and couldn't find a single person, customer or staff. We walked down to the main doors, which we found closed. We were able to get out using a push-bar exit door. We got outside, and there wasn't a single person on the street. We made it back home without crossing paths with anyone. It was very eerie." This happened about 3 years ago or so. I was sitting in the kitchen around 10 p.m. when I heard a really loud thump in the basement. I live alone with my 2 dogs, so any sound is somewhat frightening to me. So as I'm walking down the stairs to the basement, I hear the thumping again, in an oddly rhythmic pattern. I creak open the door into the basement bedroom, and I see my dog is just ramming his head and body into the wall over and over. I can't explain to you how shockingly unnatural looking it was. It looked like he was controlled or something. I called him over, and he stopped and came upstairs with me. 3 hours later, I hear the thumping again. I get out of bed to investigate, but this time when I went to check it, it was my other dog that was ramming his head into the wall. It was like he was possessed. Scared the cheese out of me. Since then, nothing like that has happened. But what an unexplainable event. I'm a film school student. My good friend, a fellow student, lives in the next town over. We occasionally crash there when we're shooting the next day. I was sleeping on the floor at his house and had a really uncomfortable feeling all night. Couldn't sleep, shivers. A week or so later, this guy got into the car and we headed off to set. He was really excited. Dude, I heard demon voices in my room this morning. I laughed at first and asked what he was talking about. He proceeded to pull out his phone and play a recording of the weirdest, most horrible sounding, but very quiet voice, saying something unrecognizable. My other friend said it best. That's the scariest thing I've ever heard in my whole life. Back at his house later, we wanted to hear it for ourselves. It was coming from the floor in the middle of his room. Weeks later, we pulled up the carpets and found nothing. We couldn't get the landlord's permission to pull up the floorboards, but the voice would never stop. Eventually, the friend moved out. I don't blame him. This happened to my dad when I was in my late teens. We lived in a small neighborhood on the outskirts of town. Sort of dumpy, but it was okay. My best friend lived 2 houses down, and the house that separated us was this huge clapboard monster in the middle of a big, creepy lot, overgrown with weeds and filled with cherub statues and the like. Basically your quintessential haunted house scenario, but it gets a bit better. The house was a favorite break-in spot for the neighborhood kids. It sat abandoned for as long as anyone I spoke to could remember, and was in all appearances abandoned hastily. The rumor was the only inhabitant died there and left no heirs, which appeared likely enough. The pantries were full of ancient, gently rotting food, and the place was full of furniture and artifacts. The place creeped me out pretty bad, but I never encountered anything ghostly myself. But there was this. My dad was drinking Keystones in the garage as night was falling. He got it in his head to go explore the house and maybe take a couple souvenirs. He grabbed a mag light and hopped the fence, poked around the ground floor a bit, then worked his way upstairs. Upstairs was nothing but a huge loft bedroom, a 4-poster bed, vanity table, and a whole bunch of garbage. He found a couple of metal pitchers which could be tarnished silver. He snagged them. Then he heard a faint noise from downstairs. He turned off the mag light and froze. The noise stopped, and he figured that it could have been rats. He decided it was time to leave, so he turned the mag light back on and started moving in the general direction of the exit. The noise returned, closer this time, something moving his way. Again, he turned the mag light off and froze, and again the noise stopped. It was definitely time to leave. He turned the light back on and started heading for the stairs. The noise was closer still, and now indistinct voices could be heard. He turned off the lights once more and hit the brakes, and the noises stopped again. The voices were coming from the staircase, close enough now to be identified, but not understood. He said it sounded like Japanese. Enough was enough. He ran out of that place like his hair was on fire. There's not much more to say, really. He returned to the garage with his prizes in tow and presumably finished off his beer. A cute story. But the interestingly vindicating part came a couple years later. My parents were considering buying that plot of land, tearing down the house and building something for themselves in its place. It never came to anything, but in researching who actually owned the property, they found an interesting fact. The last person to live in that house did indeed die alone there. And no kidding, he was indeed totally Japanese. As for the pictures, my brother took one of them to decorate his apartment after moving out, and claimed poltergeist activity connected to the relic until he disposed of it. I was at my uncle's house in the countryside with my sister, and we were playing hide and seek. My uncle went out to buy some food for us. I was hiding downstairs in this weird closet thing I had found, when I heard a little banging noise and got spooked. I chalked it up to a little rat or something and continued to hide. I then heard what sounded like a snore and a groan. I immediately got out and ran to my sister. We both sat at the door together crying until my uncle got home. My uncle just laughed it off, and we were relieved. Years later, an old man's dead body was found in a closet in the attic when my uncle tried to sell the house. It was revealed he had been squatting there for almost a decade, and he had written in a notebook about how he was going to kill my uncle and keep the home for himself. If he hadn't died, I really think it would have happened. This is my spooky story. It's not spooky in the conventional sense, but it's the closest thing to a paranormal experience I've ever had. When I was 16 or 17, I played in a band with my brother. We decided to go to the beach after a gig. I was hanging out on the beach with our bandmates, and people were taking pictures about 300 or 400 feet away. It was very dark out, and during one flash of their camera, I saw a pure white silhouette of a man running towards us. He was about halfway between us and the photographers, and disappeared in an instant. I know it wasn't just me, because my brother and our drummer also saw it. Not exactly terrifying, but it was certainly one of the strangest things that's ever happened to me. Some buddies and I went camping by the lake one night. About 1:30 in the morning, we heard some rustling in the bushes, but figured it was just a rabbit or something. We went over to check it out and found nothing. About 5 minutes later, a huge pickup truck that was lifted and blaring loud music drove by on the dirt road, really, really slowly, and shining a huge police-grade spotlight on me and my friends. The truck burned out and kept driving, so my best friend and I decided to drive up the road and see if we could spot anything unusual about the truck. We got to the main road, and there were probably 7 or 8 cop cars, lights all flashing, and 2 or 3 ambulances. We stopped to turn around, and I swear, like a horror film, a cop pecked on my window with his flashlight out of nowhere. He asked what we were doing, and we told him we were camping and about the truck. He said, "Well, you boys might want to camp somewhere else. We had a triple homicide here and haven't located the suspect." My friend said, "So should we be scared, like some kind of idiot?" And the cop said, and I quote, "Well, I'm not scared, but there are 20 officers here and we all have guns." I said yes, sir, and tore off back down to the campsite. My best friend called the rest of our buddies and told them to pack up the gear, said not to ask questions and that we had to get out. We literally threw 2 fully pitched tents in the back of one of our trucks and got out of there. The cops located the killer about 30 minutes later, at our campsite. My parents got divorced 5 years ago. I'd spent about half my time at my mom's apartment and half of it at my dad's house. I've lived in the house since I was born, and have had weird experiences on and off there, but never at my mom's place. I used to wake my parents up by screaming and pointing to a corner in my room, claiming there was a man staring at me. I don't really remember that myself, but I do remember always staring at the corner and being scared of the dark. About 3.5 years ago, I had a nap and woke up when it was dark. Usually the TV was on, but my dad would turn it off when I was asleep. He must have assumed I'd gone to sleep for real. I sat up in the dark, about to stir my computer awake, but it took a minute because I felt a little weird. I heard 3 footsteps outside my door, like someone was slowly dragging their feet on the ground. I froze in fear, still in the dark. My mind started racing. What was that? The house is an old farm in the middle of nowhere. When it's dark, it's pitch black, and when it's quiet, it's absolutely still. I grew up with constant fear during the nighttime. My parents refused to let me sleep with the lights on when it was too late, and I've heard a lot of noises I've grown used to explaining. Footsteps in the attic is just stray cats. Moving doors happen when someone at the other end of the house opens a window, but I couldn't explain this. I thought it was my dad, but I would have heard him come and eventually leave. It was also heavier steps, and he would have poked his head through to check up on me. There was no other reason to go to that end of the house otherwise. It could have been a cat, but again, I would have heard it come and go. And the step was too heavy and too slow for a cat. Suddenly, I felt like I was suffocating. Through the wall, like an image in my head, I saw a shadow standing right outside, facing in. It was breathing heavily. and I had a sudden intense fear that I was going to be crushed. But eventually, it faded away. I sat for a little longer before I was able to man up. I slid open the door, and obviously there was nothing there. I walked through the house to the bathroom and sat down. The throne faced the door. Again, I felt like I was suffocating. I could see it again through the door. It was standing in the kitchen, looking at me through the wall. It wanted to crush me. It was breathing heavily, and I could see its shoulders move. I freezed for 5 minutes until I could relax. When I opened the door, there was nothing there. I reasoned that I was overreacting and went back to sleep. I dreamt about a sleepover with friends. One after one, they'd pass out or fall asleep, without being able to wake up. The shadow figure was constantly in the background of it. I could notice it, but not really. By the end of the dream, I was the only one left. It was coming for me now, closing in with nowhere to run. I was stuck outside, pinned in a corner. It came closer, a complete shadow figure, but I could feel it staring. It kept coming, and I couldn't breathe. The dream ended with the shadow a few centimeters from my face. It told me something, but I don't remember what. I never slept in that room again. After my sister moved out, I got her room instead, and I no longer feel it in there. But I can't walk past my old room without feeling as if I'm being stared down from the corner. I was living in this really old house while I was in college. I was up late one night in the living room watching TV and decided to just sleep on the couch. At some point in the wee hours of the morning, my phone buzzed with a text message which woke me up. I opened my eyes slowly, and in the corner of the room, I was making out a figure that slowly materialized into an old lady in a nightgown, just standing there staring at me. I closed my eyes and figured I was probably just imagining it, so I rolled over and went back to sleep. I then woke up again, and there she was, only now I could make her out a little better, and she had what looked like black holes for eyes that were sucking in light, if that makes any sense. I again told myself I must be dreaming, so I rolled over on my face to the back of the couch. But then, I felt her hands scratching my back. I rolled over, and she was right there in my face with a look like she was screaming at me, but with no sound. I jumped up and ran to my room and shut the door. I was completely freaked out and couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. That was the last time I ever slept in that living room. I grew up near the Great Lakes. One night, I went with a friend to the shore to take photos of the stars, but unfortunately it was cloudy. The lake was uncomfortably still, no waves at all, and the water looked like glass. The clouds were very even and smooth too, so if you looked out to the water, the reflection of the smooth clouds went all the way to the horizon. Very eerie, and looked like a dark, endless abyss. We were out on a pier with only one access point to the shore, We were also in the middle of nowhere. There were no other cars remotely near ours. Around 2 a.m., we saw a figure walking towards us. We both got quiet and watched as this dark figure got closer and closer. As it approached, we could hear what sounded like its right foot dragging on the cement. Everything was silent except for the sound of the foot dragging with each step. The figure stopped about 10 feet in front of me. It seemed to stare at us for the longest 30 seconds of my life. It said nothing, we said nothing, and it turned and walked away into the darkness. The only light that was in the area was a streetlight at the end of the pier. We watched that streetlight for about an hour, and nobody crossed under it. We were scared to walk back in case whatever that was happened to still be outside. We slowly walked back, checking the sides of the pier and down to the water as we walked. There was nothing, nobody, just us. I still can't explain what we saw that night.